Martin Baxter leads IEMA's policy and external engagement activity. He works in the UK and internationally to support the transition to a low-carbon, resource-efficient, and sustainable economy. Martin, take it away.
Well, thank you very much and welcome everybody. Thank you for inviting me to speak at the International Auditor Symposium. My name is Martin Baxter, Chief Policy Advisor at IEMA. I'm going to be looking at the role of ISO 14001 Environmental Management System in supporting non-state actors to deliver both the UN Sustainable Development Goals and the UN Paris Climate Agreement. So just a little bit of an outline of what I'm going to cover in this session. Give you a very quick introduction to IEMA and my role, particularly as it relates to the development of standards. And I'm going to spend a moment or two on the sustainability challenge and how we need to respond. Then we'll start to look at 14001 as a tool to support organisations making a positive contribution to that sustainability challenge. And then finally looking at how do we scale this up, and finally just pulling this together. So a little bit about IEMA. We're a professional body of environment and sustainability professionals. We have approaching 15,000 individuals who are members of IEMA in about 100 countries around the world. Many of them are engaged in environmental management and use ISO 14001 as a tool and framework to improve their organisation's environmental performance. As an organisation, we are very focused on setting recognised competency standards for people working in environment and sustainability roles. We connect those people together so that they can share experiences and learn and develop their capabilities so that they can make a bigger contribution to the delivery of that through their work. And we're also interested and work to look at how we can bring a broader understanding of sustainability into organisations for people who are not directly working in that competency area. So whether it's people working in procurement or finance or leadership roles, so that we can have a greater literacy around sustainability, so that the work of professionals who are leading and driving change, they have a more responsive audience within business. And finally on IEMA, we set a sustainability skills map where people can develop their skills and capability, and we have membership levels against which people can benchmark their credentials. So we've been going for quite a long time, and it's a really exciting opportunity for people to be making a really positive contribution and a difference to this agenda through the world of work. In terms of my role, I deal a lot with our external engagement, working with governments. So I sit on a government legislative strategy group looking at the role of environmental legislation. But also I'm involved in the development of standards both nationally here in the UK and internationally. So I was the UK national expert on the revision to 14001 in the Working Group 5 that developed that content, and subsequently I've been made chair of the subcommittee in ISO 26207, which is responsible for environmental management systems. So that includes 14001, 14004, and a range of other standards as well, which are either under revision or under development. So in terms of encapsulating some of the big challenges that we face, for us, we look at what we call the perfect storm. So we live in a world where the United Nations has a projection for a global population by 2050 of about 9.7 billion people. So we're looking between now and then, in the next 32 years or so, another 2.5 billion people on the planet. That will drive demand for water, for food, for energy. We'll need infrastructure so that people have places to live, places to learn, places to work. People will need feeding. And actually this provides quite a significant challenge in terms of both our impact on the environment and the way in which, as the environment starts to change, and we're seeing that with the way in which the climate is changing, than the impact on societies. So for us, this is about working through what this means in terms of a response, both on a macro scale, and also how does it position you as an organisation to be able to take this forward and do something about it. So we really sort of like link into this, what we call the donut model, which was by Kate Raworth, which on the outside here you'll see a description, if you like, of an environmental ceiling. We have one planet, so one planet living is absolutely essential. And we have a number of, if you like, physical environmental constraints, which we call that environmental ceiling. So we need a safe climate, we need access to fresh water, we need to protect oceans from acidification, we need to understand the impacts of chemical pollution, etc., ozone depletion, biodiversity loss. And in the centre as well, of course, we also recognise that there's a social foundation or social floor within which people are living. So people need access to somewhere to live, somewhere to work, they need education, they need healthcare, they need access to food and water, etc. And we describe sustainability as creating that and operating in that safe space between that social foundation and that environmental ceiling. And therefore the real challenge is about how we're going to make that happen. So for us, this is how we look at sustainability. And we think for us, it's certainly about how you move from not compromising on these, but understanding how we need to develop economies in a way which will allow society to live within its means. So that's within, environmental limits, and ensuring that people have access to key needs as we move forward. In terms of a global response to this challenge, it's been interesting to see how on a global scale, an international scale, the United Nations has been instrumental in trying to position things for a positive future. So the United Nations has had quite a long history in terms of trying to develop a global response to the sustainability challenge. And most recently, that's been manifested in terms of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So the UN SDGs, 17 SDGs, provide a response mechanism out to 2030 for countries to be able to put themselves and therefore global society and global environment overall onto a sustainable footing. So whether it's dealing with no poverty, zero hunger, dealing with issues around decent work and economic growth, whether it's about sustainable cities and communities, and then getting into issues around environment, whether it's climate action, life below water, life on land. So the UN Sustainable Development Goals set this framework within which countries are developing their responses. It builds on the Millennium Development Goals, but is much more comprehensive. I think what's really, really interesting here is that what we're seeing is companies, if you like, for the first time really stepping up and looking at how they make their mark and how they can make their contribution to supporting countries to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. On the right-hand side here, I've got the UN climate change logo, because climate action under SDG 13 is really being driven through the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change processes. So it's a whole set of action actors around that, whether it's, I'm building on what was the Paris Agreement in 2015, which is to set the world on a trajectory to prevent dangerous climate change and temperature increases on average to be below 2 degrees. Crucially, there's also significant aspects in terms of not just limiting emissions, but also taking action to adapt to a changing climate, so the extent to which climate change will impact on communities, infrastructure, business, people's livelihoods, and becoming more resilient to that change. And secondly, as well, a flow of finance to support countries who might be impacted in a way which is equitable and just. So in terms of that global sustainability challenge that I outlined earlier, then now we have what you might call a comprehensive framework for countries, and therefore within countries, organisations to be able to respond. So now we come on to, well, what's the role of 14001 being able to support this? So 14001 Environmental Management System Standard, led by ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, and it provides the framework for organizations to systematically manage their interface with the environment, fulfill compliance obligations, and improve environmental performance. It was first published in 1996. There was a separate revision in 2004. And finally, where we are now is the latest edition was published in 2015. I've put a link here to the subcommittee of TC207 Subcommittee 1. So there is significant resource there about 14001, so the background about how we developed it, some really useful mechanisms in there. So if you need interpretation about some of the requirements, then have a look on there, because it outlines either some interpretations that have been reviewed by the subcommittee and or a process by which you can get clarifications. But I think the important thing about the standard is that firstly, it's had quite a long track record of establishment. And secondly, as we were developing this last revision, we were looking at what might be changing externally and building a standard which would be fit for the future. Bear in mind that probably this version of 14001 is still going to be being used around the world in 2025. That aligns very, very well with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Just a quick sort of like thumbnail really on some of the significant changes that we made in 2015 version. I mean, the first one was that ISO had developed its high-level structure for all of its management system standards. So the Annex SL in the ISO directives mapped out a sort of like generic management framework for all of its management system standards, so whether that's quality, IT security, food safety, environment, risk, a whole set of management system standards, all now based on a common framework, common clause numbering and headings, and some common core management systems text. And so 14001 was, if you like, the first of the major standards to adopt and use that in the way in which it was developed. And I think when you look at that framework and you look at the revised 14001, particularly in the context of the UN Sustainable Development Goals and climate mitigation and adaptation, there are some sort of key building blocks there. So one was the link to organizational strategy, so making 14001 much more of a strategic as well as a tactical operational tool in an organization, particularly because of the way in which we link in leadership and accountability, and the understanding of the external and internal context of an organization, linking in as well with understanding needs and expectations of interested parties. That whole framework links well with an organization's strategy and helps to build environment into the way in which an organization is thinking about that, but also looks at how an environmental management system can be used to develop that overall organizational strategy. Secondly, there was a big element there in the new standard about risk and opportunities as well, but very much looking at risk in a holistic way, not requiring detailed risk assessments necessarily, but certainly a risk-based approach. And I'll pick up on that a little bit later through my presentation. Certainly resilience is an aspect that comes through, and probably this is one of the big changes compared to previous versions of 14001, where we're looking at the extent to which external environmental conditions might impact on an organization. So that could be from changing climate, the availability of resources, which might constrain the way in which your business and organization is able to operate. So rather than just have ISO 14001 manage your impact on the environment, this is where I have that wording, manage the interface between your organization and the environment. Particularly can be important in supply chains as well. So just-in-time manufacturing can be vulnerable to flood events in different parts of the world, or depending on the nature of your organization, drought conditions, etc., which can disrupt supply. So interesting to see how the whole concept of resilience is deeply embedded within the revised 14001. And of course, improvement is absolutely central. And so we are very firmly in 14001 looking at how your environmental management system is going to help you as an organization improve your performance beyond which you would otherwise be able to achieve without that system in place. So very much speaks to that whole agenda in some of the SDGs. So as we start to look at some of those core environmental parts of the Sustainable Development Goals, so whether it's life on land, climate action, life below water, clean water and sanitation, etc. And we understand that these are sort of interrelated and integrated. But when you start to then look at 14001, what you see is obviously that risk-based thinking, particularly around the environment, underpins much of what an organisation is going to be managing in terms of its environmental management system. So that risk-based thinking underpins the identification and evaluation processes in environmental management systems. The life cycle perspective, which is another, if you like, new feature or an aspect of 14001 which has been given a little bit more prominence. So looking at how you can evaluate and understand potential impacts and aspects beyond your direct operations into both your supply chains and into the way in which your products or services are used and potentially ultimately disposed of. That whole process of preventing and reducing undesired effects. So, for example, the potential for external environmental conditions to affect the organisation and the delivery of its overall sort of like strategy and raison d'etre. Very much so that risk-based thinking really important, and that really drives into some of this integrated thinking as well in the SDGs. I think that underpinning as well slightly links into other aspects of performance. So the application of 14001 helps organisations to, firstly break that link between economic activity and environmental impact. So doing more with less, driving resource efficiency, energy efficiency, the way in which you can use and manage materials. So really sort of helps to speak to that agenda about decent work and economic growth. And that whole process of improvement doesn't just look at systems improvement, but also you can start to look at how you can, through an environmental lens, enhance your products and services, for example, through the application of eco-design. And then it's about how you can start to deliver sort of like multiple benefits and create those win-wins. So, for example, when you are reducing waste and improving resource productivity, you can actually cut material consumption costs, reduce GHGs. So you then start to say, actually, by taking this sort of action, we become stronger as an organisation, we can become financially more successful, we can reduce our impact on the environment, we can get access to changing markets, etc., etc. So this becomes this speaking to win-wins. And again, this enhancing resilience to a changing environmental conditions, again, provides you with a more stable organisation that is able to operate over the longer term. So whether it's looking at responsible consumption and production, so things like eco-design work very, very well in that, whether it's about sustainable cities and communities, so providing stable employment as your organisation becomes more efficient, more effective, more competitive through good environmental management, then you're able to support that. Then as a management tool, this has a real sort of application overall in the delivery of and the support towards some of the Sustainable Development Goals. It's not just on those aspects of sort of like business and environment in terms of very, very hard focused areas in which 14001 is able to provide a link into the Sustainable Development Goals. So as you get into the SDGs, for example, here I've highlighted one, no poverty. So Sustainable Development Goal 1 is about ending poverty in all its forms everywhere. And part of that, there is a target that by 2030, countries will be building resilience to vulnerable situations and reduce people's exposure and vulnerability to climate-related extreme events and other social, economic and environmental shocks and disasters. So ensuring that the business and economic base of our country is able to understand what some of these consequences might be and to become more resilient to them is really important. And as I've outlined earlier, there are some really good connections here to actually having stable management frameworks in organizations where you can systematically identify where some of these risks might be and put in place measures to become more resilient to that change and enable your organization to succeed. Another example is SDG 2 on ending hunger. So ending hunger, achieve food security and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. So the sub-target here is 2.4 by 2030, ensuring sustainable food production systems. Clearly, many organisations that are using 14001 are in food, drink, production processes, are sometimes in land management areas, so they're in agriculture. This is about how you develop practices which help to maintain ecosystems, strengthen capacity for adaptation to climate change, extreme weather, drought, flooding, etc. So by using 14001 in the food and drink sector, in the land management and agriculture sector, actually you can start to have a systematic framework by which you can support development, the achievement of SDG 2. The final example like this is about good health and well-being, so very much focused on people. And by 2030, the sub-target here is about substantially reducing the number of deaths and illness from hazardous chemicals in air, water and soil pollution and contamination. Clearly, the application of 14001, which is underpinned by a policy commitment to environmental protection and that whole issue about a broad aspect of prevention of pollution, speaks to this agenda about limiting environmental pollution, improving on performance, and generally sort of being a far more clean and green organisation. And so that, again, that supports this Sustainable Development Goal. So there's quite a significant sort of opportunity here to use and deploy 14001 around the world as one of those framework tools that organizations can use to become more focused on the way in which they manage their impacts on the environment and how they sort of really drive forward and improve on that. In terms of the people and those who are involved in 14001, at an ISO level, we have 94 participating and observer countries. So in terms of that strong foundation that links into how are these UN Sustainable Development Goals actually going to be implemented and achieved, well, that provides a very, very good foundation. ISO's processes are underpinned by strong stakeholder engagement and consensus building. So we had thousands of comments from all parts of the world when we were reviewing and revising the previous version of 14001. So, and many national member bodies had lots of outreach programs to be able to get participation into what was going to be going into this standard. So that whole consensus building and engagement process throughout is absolutely critical. And then there is, 14001 does provide a framework for other more specific technical standards to be used as support tools. So whether it's the forthcoming ISO 14090 framework standard on climate adaptation, whether it's the 14064 on GHGs, whether it's 50001 on energy management, these are standards which can be used on particular focused areas to help organisations get more out of their 14,001. Then finally, of course, 14,001 itself has that organisational level understanding of the needs and expectations of interested parties, where environment and sustainability and interest issues can be sort of like brought to the fore, and the organisation can plan how it might respond to those that need to be addressed. Final part here is just to look at the scale of 14,001. So ISO does collect data on accredited certifications. What we've seen is, since the late 90s, significant growth in terms of accredited certification, to the extent at which there are, well, this data goes to the end of 2016. We would expect in a few months the data of the last year, 2017, to be published. What this shows is both 346,000 accredited certificates in over 200 countries around the world, 8% annual growth. This is a tool, and that's just accredited certifications, by the way. So there are many organisations that use 14,001 either as an internal management framework with and no external recognition. Some will self-declare, some will use third-party recognition of their self-declaration. But this is just looking at accredited certification. What we see is that this is a scalable management framework that is used around the world. So it has significant market penetration, probably more than any other, well, certainly more than any other standard in ISO, which is particularly focused on environment, but also there are no other standards which are comparable in terms of being able to be deployed at this sort of scale and with this sort of infrastructure behind it in terms of development. So I think there's a real opportunity to certainly get more out of 14,001 as it continues to be used. I think what that does require is an element of capacity building. So developing broader understandings about how the standard can be used and deployed in organisations in different parts of the world, so many more participants. And also for those people who are already using the standard to think of new and creative ways by which they can drive environmental performance improvement. The context within which organisations are working in terms of environment is changing constantly, whether it's new rules and regulations which are being developed, whether it's responses to environmental constraints, whether it's responses to the interest of interested parties and their particular sort of needs. There's an awful lot more to be done. So certainly we see 14,001 as being that tool to support the achievement of multiple sustainable development goals, so not just those that are obviously linked to environment, and is a significant opportunity to contribute to supporting countries in their delivery of the Paris Agreement. 14,001 is both an integrated and interrelated approach, so it's not just a single issue of an element of the environment, but it provides that holistic approach to how an organisation might systematically understand how it interfaces with the environment and to improve its performance. It's widely used and scalable, so it's not creating something fresh, it's about how we get more out of the tools that we're already deploying. And it does support that whole collaboration and partnership approach to working, which ordinarily we would say you can get more done when you work in collaboration, where you're working against the tide. So finally, from me, it's a thank you. There are some resources that we have as IEMA which very much speak to this agenda. And I hope you enjoy and take the opportunity to engage in more parts of the symposium. Thank you very much.
This ends today's presentation. Thanks for attending.